Productions, we just don't read. Like many others out there who we say ought to be looking into scriptural things more, they are looking into spiritual things more than we are in terms of reading Christian books. And we don't have the opportunity in times like this to really dig in and dig deeply, and so I appreciate that comment. I have such a conflict of interest because part of the money that I live on is based on these books, and I hate to go into a church-type setting and say, spend your money on my books, buy my books instead of supporting Columbia Christian, you know, whatever it might be. It's just a real conflict of interest. But borrow the book if need be, and try to read as much as you can, because these issues are so complicated that we can hardly get to them in the short time we have. This is my last time of presentation here this weekend, and I just want to thank those who were responsible for inviting me, and all of the rest of you who've given such wonderful encouragement and support. It's been great being here. Chuck and Levera just gave me a really nice break. They took me down on the Max. We went to Max today downtown in the fall colors, and it was just a lovely day. So I got just a little whipped cream on the dessert today, just before coming here to be able to see Portland in splendor on a beautiful fall day. So I thank you for that opportunity as well. And great to be with, start to say, old friends, really old friends, really old friends that we haven't seen for a long time. All of us are getting older and older, aren't we? But it's just been a grand experience, and I appreciate being here and being a part of it. I feel almost anticlimactic today in the sense that I want to just do some wrapping up on the issue of abortion and this matter of choice. When you get into talking with people on the other side about the issue of abortion, it seems to me that they almost portray some of the most ridiculous kinds of responses. One that hits me particularly is a classic illustration. I'd be curious after I tell you this, how many of you have heard this illustration before? It's the one about the musician that's appended to your body. How many have heard that? Anybody? Boy, it's in all their literature, and in debates I have with them, they always bring this one up. It has to do with this idea of the woman saying, the baby, if it is a baby, is a part of my body, and therefore I have the right to control it because it's a part of my body. Therefore, I should have the right of unlimited choice to decide what to do with whatever it is that is in my womb. It's a part of my body. You can't force me to do something with part of my body. Well, the hypothetical that is given is that suppose you woke up one morning and society, through its representatives, had appended to your body, almost in Siamese twin fashion, the world, we would be greatly robbed. And his life depends upon your life. He breathes because you breathe. His heart pumps because your heart pumps. Were it not for you, he would die. The implication is that none of us would want to bear that burden, and therefore we'd be justified in unplugging the tubes or whatever it is that separate him from our body so we could go on with the freedom that we normally enjoy. The analogy is supposed to be that the baby in the womb is like that the woman says, I do not want this baby, and her freedom shouldn't be limited if she doesn't want it. Which is a pretty interesting kind of, what is the obvious difference here? What is the obvious difference? Anyone?
She sponsored it in the first place.
That's right. She sponsored it in the first place. That what we're talking about is not an involuntary joining. What we're talking about is a voluntary act which brings about a result that is known in advance as a possibility. When you engage in sexual intercourse, you know that there is the possibility of creating new life. Now, having said that, there are those who will tell you, but I took the pill, I tried not to conceive, and despite all my best efforts not to conceive, I'm burdened with this. You know, it's kind of like saying I drive down the street and I drive as carefully and as cautiously as I can, so there's no way anybody has any right to run into me. Well, that's true, they don't, but we know that accidents do happen, And if we get out on the highway, we sort of accept some kind of risk out there, don't we? If we don't want any possibility of it happening, I guess we could stay home and not drive. What we want is a society that is responsibility free. That idea that we don't want to be forced into accepting anything we don't like. But what kind of a society can that be? That we don't accept responsibility for our own actions. And now that leads me into, by the way, because what do you do in the case of a rape? In the case of a rape, the act which leads to the conception was not voluntary, was not invited, was not sponsored, as you say, in terms of a rape. And that's where we have so much difficulty with those who would say, let's have legislation that does not permit abortion except in case of rape or incest. And I'm assuming forcible incest, but not necessarily rape or incest. Well, what we have to do is to go back and to think about what we talked about at our last session. By the way, how many of you were not here for the last session? Oh, no, today is quite different. We had people from the first session and the second session were in it together, but we have a lot of people who were not here yesterday. Let me just go back and say quickly that we have tried to point out that in all sorts of ways, whether it be a miscarriage, where we mourn the loss of a baby, or whether it be in nurses and doctors racing to save the life of a premature baby that's been born, that we all assume is a baby and we want to save its life, whether it be criminal law, where we protect in California even a non-viable fetus as a person of interest as far as the law of battery is concerned, and a viable fetus where the law of murder is concerned. We're protected as against the entire world except the mother and her physician. When a baby is wanted, it's a baby in our society. What happens is, whatever it is, this is very profound, whatever it is whatever it is, regardless of how we're looking on to it. It doesn't change, whatever it is, depending upon our attitude toward it. It doesn't say, do you think I'm a baby? I'm a baby. You think I'm not a baby? You're right, I'm not a baby. It doesn't say that. We may be wrong, those of us who think it's a baby. Could be wrong. Theoretically, we could be wrong. But if we're wrong about it, it doesn't make it a baby or not a baby. Whatever it is whatever it is. And if it's a baby, for all other intents and purposes in our minds throughout society, and it always is, then it's a baby even when you want to kill it in the womb, in abortion. It's still a baby. Well, but it was the product of a rape. Well, that's tragic, deeply tragic for the mother. It may be tragic for the baby, may or may not be. But it's still a baby. It hasn't changed because of the circumstances under which it might have been the wife, but engaged in voluntary sexual intercourse with her husband, resulting in a pregnancy. I mean, there's all sorts of women in probably this audience who have had little surprises along the way. I told you that my parents did. They didn't set out to make a baby. And my little sister was conceived. And she was a baby. The baby that's conceived as a result of a rape is a baby. Whatever it is, it's a baby. And for that reason, despite all of the hard things that surround those circumstances, we have no more right to take the life of a baby that has been conceived of rape than we do otherwise. There's just no way you can make any kind of a logical exception there. Now, a baby last year in Wichita, Kansas. I'm sorry, just to get the facts straight, I could just leave you there and you wouldn't know the difference, but the fact is, it was in Little Rock, Arkansas. I was preaching at a church there in Little Rock, Arkansas, spoke on this subject at a class. Afterwards, a woman came up to me and she said, I am the product of a rape. And my mother is so glad that she had me. The other thing about the rape thing is that A woman has a difficult enough time living with the after effects of a rape. There's enough sort of guilt about it even when you're not guilty. Apparently women feel guilty about it even when they're not the one who's guilty. But to compound that problem, when they know they're of which they were an innocent victim, to compound that with giving them guilt about taking the life of some other innocent person, we're not helping most rape victims to compound their problem. Now they've got two guilts. One which is not legitimate and one which, in a way, is. But either way, it's compounding the problem. We try to be compassionate, but compassion can often be misguided compassion and short-sighted compassion. What about the life of the mother? Is that a different situation? Yes, it is. Because now you've got two different innocent persons in risk. And in that situation, we always yield to the life in being because we know that life is in being and is already alive and functioning, and therefore, if you have to toss up the coin in a situation like that, the either or, you go with the life in being, I guess. That too could be a hard question, but at least there is a real distinction to be made there. Besides which, very rarely are you going to have a situation where the mother's life is really at risk other than a kind of tubal pregnancy, in which case in the tubal pregnancy the baby is probably going to die in any event. Those are hard cases as well, but quite different from the rape and incest cases. But let me put some perspective here. Just assuming for a moment that we made an exception for rape and incest cases, if we did, all we're talking about is 1/10 of 1% of all abortions that take place. 1/10 of 1% of all abortions that take place would be based on those bases. And to use those two extremely rare exceptions to justify the 99% of social abortions is just without moral precedent. How can you do that? Would be the case of those who are born, quote, handicapped, challenged, however you want to put that. I don't know. Down syndrome, how do you feel about having a child that's born with Down syndrome? I'm looking forward to a marriage. I'm looking forward to healthy I know I would be crushed like anyone else to learn that my child was not completely healthy. So what's the cure for Down syndrome these days? Death. Death is the cure for Down syndrome. The anencephalic babies, the one that are born brain dead, basically, that may be a little bit different cause because they're already dead in a sense. They're dead in that they do not have brain, they do not live, they are born dead. That may be one of those very rare cases where what you are evacuating is already dead. I don't know. There's pumping life of some kind, illness of life. I don't know on that one. But I'll guarantee you on the handicap thing, this idea that we can have health through death is absurd. Health through death is absurd. And we're not even talking about the Down syndrome baby. Someone confirmed yesterday something that I have read in the front page of the London Times. Made an appeal, a public appeal. You're not going to believe this. Made a public appeal to all those parents in England whose babies had been diagnosed with hair lip or a cleft palate, saying, we know what the standard procedure is now, and that's to abort. But we think we have a new medical procedure where we can go into the womb and fix that. We would like to have your baby as an experimentation to do that. But what are the implications? The standard procedure medically today in England, and much so in America as well, if the baby is determined to have cleft palate, hair lip, abortion is the answer. We're not even talking about Down syndrome. We're talking cleft palate. Is that amazing? You cannot believe the number of letters that came in from people all over England with cleft palates who said, don't even bring this up. Don't you even talk about this to me. Oh, they were livid, as well they should be. You know what, we've gotten to the point we want perfect babies. We want perfect babies. If my baby's not perfect, I'm going to give it back. As a matter of fact, you know, this is not standard fare, but I have read from the feminist branch of the pro-choice movement, there are some who would literally advocate you ought to have a 30-day return policy on a baby, just like on any bit of merchandise. They're born, you check them out. As a matter of fact, there was a celebrated case. The baby was born. All it needed was a little minor surgery to keep it living. But after 2 or 3 days, they didn't perform the surgery. It couldn't get food. They didn't perform the surgery, which had been simple enough. Why? The baby had Down syndrome. Because it had Down syndrome, they wouldn't perform the surgery to let it eat, and it died. That's like a 30-day return policy. That's where we're at. Just amazing. Absolutely amazing. Infanticide is okay by some. And you know how all of you pro-life people say that there's absolutely no difference between the 8-month and 9-month-year-old baby and the baby that's born alive. They're saying, you know something? You're right. You're right. And because we think we have a right to kill it in the womb at 7, 8, and 9 months, we have a right to kill it outside the womb as well. Is that amazing? I'm just floored by the immorality of the cause. Absolutely floored by it. By the way, there's something that we can turn around and we've got some thoughtful people in these classes. Somebody came up afterwards and, you know, when you're talking about viability, viability is based upon dependability. Who said that? Who reminded me of that? Here today? Reminded me of this important point. If you're talking about viability being a matter of dependence, that they're not viable when they're totally dependent upon the mother. They are viable when they're not dependent upon the mother. When would the line of viability be reached? All of you who are mothers, think about this. When would the line of viability be reached if it's a matter of depending on the mother? About 18? Kill them anytime before 18? Well, I think it's about 13, 14, and 15. But don't you see that point? If we're talking about viability being based upon dependence, when they come out of the womb, they would die were it not for the mother. That's another reason why viability just doesn't work. But there are people who would say, even outside the womb, we can take the life. And you know why? It's because it's based upon a quality of life rather than sanctity of life. That's where we've gotten to. Quality of life rather than sanctity of life. That's what's underlying all of the issue that we're talking about. If you get it down to quality of life, then it's just a question of how we determine what good quality is on the beginning of life. And by the way, California, we've got our own initiative, euthanasia, coming up on the other end of life as well. And don't think those two are not tied together. Abortion at one end, euthanasia on the other end. Barely escaped an initiative in Washington last year, wasn't it? Doctor-assisted suicide and so forth. And don't think it's this idea of pulling the plug and letting someone die naturally. That's not what people are talking about today. No siree. They're talking about having the doctor, at the request of the patient, helping them commit suicide. And don't think that is the end of it either, because as is the practice, if not the law in the Netherlands, the practice is these days that the family can decide when the quality of life of an older person is gone, and the doctor will take the life without the consent of the patient. And that's where we're headed. And I guarantee you in 25 years that's where we'll be in this country. Because once you cheapen the sanctity of life, it's not safe at either. But you believe in capital punishment, someone says. Well, given the appropriate circumstances, I do. But what an analogy that is, to go from an innocent life to a life that has forfeited the right to life because it has taken life. I mean, we have such shallow notions of morality today, we can't see the distinction between life in the gas chamber for someone who's taken life wrongfully and the innocent life in the womb. We just can't sort anything out these days. Incredibly strange. Well, what are we going to do when we overturn Roe v. Wade, if that day ever comes, and abortion is made illegal? Aren't we going to have everybody running around getting illegal abortions, back alley abortions, and women dying by the thousands? Ah, what an argument that is. Are we going to assume, first of all, that all the women are going to violate the law? Don't think so. Are we going to assume that they're going to be getting abortions from back alley people? No. They're going to be people who are well trained. Are we assuming that the figures were correct, that we lost some 500,000 women a year to back alley abortions when abortions were illegal? No way. Don't believe that. Do not believe that. One of the most feminist, written by a woman, written by a feminist, and she in her book acknowledges that in her research she went around to all the people who were involved in bringing Roe v. Wade into being, the case that legalized abortion, and all the organizations admitted there never were 500,000 women that were killed from back alley abortions. Someone just said, let's start off with 500, which was probably closer to the case, and that's too many, but what's close to the case? 500. Didn't sound good enough, and somebody said, well, let's just say 1,000. Oh, how about 10,000? How about 100,000? How about 500,000? And it just artificially rose, and everybody knew it. And those today who have renounced their participation, like Dr. Nathanson, who had performed thousands of abortions himself personally, I think some 60,000, and finally got out of the business. He said, I was part of the movement, we made up the numbers. It worked too well for any of us to be honest about it. It worked too well. But the organization called Jane, that prided itself in getting illegal abortions prior to Roe v. Wade, was so proud they hadn't lost one woman. Not one woman. It was all back alley stuff, all illegal stuff. Really what happened was, the irony was that the family physician, who only rarely did an abortion illegally at the behest of some influential member of the community that came to him at the back door at night with his daughter, botched up what jobs were botched up more often than the back alley abortionists who did them every day and learned how to do them well. And don't think that they don't already have the forces out there, even if we were to make it illegal, to have people who would be performing abortions. They're training women right now to do it and to have an underground like they had before Roe v. Wade, to funnel women who want abortions into safe abortions. They're saying if abortions are made illegal, don't worry, we won't have to worry about the male medical establishment. We women will have safe abortions. That's what they say in their feminist literature. But to the rest, 500,000 back alley abortion deaths will occur every year. I mean, they're not even honest about it. Just read their literature. I'm not reading pro-life literature. I buy the pro-choice literature and read it. It's amazing what you find in there, the admissions that are there. I'll tell you what's going to come along, legal or illegal. Here it comes. This is not the best gift we have ever had from France. This is not the Statue of Liberty. This is a statue of death. RU 486. RU 486. RU 486. Are you for it? No. RU 486 is a deadly pill, an abortion pill. By the way, there's a lot of hype that you can just have a woman go into the market and pharmacy like any other over-the-counter stuff, and you're going to get an abortion pill. Not exactly. Not exactly. It does require clinical observation. It's causing all sorts of problems for women. But, I mean, the health problems, I'm not going to argue the health problems because someday they'll get it perfected where there won't be health problems, and then where will our argument be? The point is that it's still going to abort babies. And everybody's going to be told this is a safe, harmless pill, a contragestive. A contragestive. If you want to do the unthinkable, what did we learn in the first session, those of you who were here? Change the name of something. If you want to do the unthinkable, just call it something else. It's a contragestive. Whatever that is, what it is an abortion pill, a death pill for the baby. And the latest on RU46, have you kept up with it? The latest is that it's going to be used as the morning after pill. The morning after pill. It doesn't perform an abortion, they say. It just prevents the zygote, the fertilized egg from implanting, and that's not an abortion. Excuse me? It's a fertilized egg. It's a fertilized egg. Wow. Wow. There won't be anything else that's added to that fertilized egg in the growth of a person until that person dies and the body decays in the grave. There won't be anything added to that combination of ingredients from that point forward. I think it's an abortion. Well, boy, now that brings us into an interesting area. That brings us into a really interesting area. What about the pill? What about birth control? How is that different? Well, the various forms of abortion prevention have this to be said for them in theory. In theory, what the contraception does is to prevent the joining together of the sperm and the egg so that there's no conception, no zygote. That's what they're supposed to do. Some of them, in fact, do what RU-486 does, work after this takes place. Some of them do. The coil, for example. That's the way that works. We need to be kind of circumspect about methods of birth control. If, in fact, however, you are keeping these from coming together, from a medical standpoint, you do not have the beginning of life. And they say, now wait a minute, the sperm has life in it, egg has life in it, so what we're doing here is killing millions and millions of years of life all the way back from the beginning of evolution? That's the first problem. No. No one ever says that apart from joining into a new combination that we have a new life. We don't do that with regard to animals, much less humans. We don't ever say, that's, the sperm of some animal is a living being. Oh, it's got life in it, but it's not a living being. What a superficial argument that is. But from a standpoint of birth control, how does it work? The pill basically works before the joining of the sperm and the egg. There is some controversy about that as to whether that is always true. But there is a vast difference, may I just use another illustration, between planting a tree and cutting one down after it's already growing. That's what we're talking about. Now, from a theological standpoint, we have a more subtle issue. Remember, if you were here at 10 o'clock, we were talking about withholding God's children from him and letting the Lord provide, doing what he asks us to do. Theologically, it's even more difficult because particularly in our time, we've gotten so used to the pill, even in the church, that we say, surely we can control birth before these two come together. Well, in a technical scientific sense, if we've accomplished that, that's right. Theologically, we need to maybe ask ourselves at least one other question, and I don't know how to come down on this one, but we have to at least ask ourselves, is that really what God wants us to do? To control his blessings of life that come? We at least have to ask that question. We've always said that the Catholics have taken that too far. And I'll tell you, their reason for it is the most absurd reason in the world. They call us back to Onan. You remember he was to raise up seed to his dead brother's wife, and he went through the motions of the sexual act, but then at the last minute pulled away, spilled the seed on the ground. She did not conceive. He did it for the mechanical pleasure of it, but not for the purpose that it was intended to be, to raise up a child through his brother's name, through the wife, through the widow. That's all a very complicated story. He did in terms of not having a child as such was wrong. What it was saying was he disobeyed the law, the levirate marriage law, that was designed to continue the seed in the brother's wife. So the Catholics have got the wrong scriptural basis, but the basic concept is something that maybe we need to re-examine. And I would say this, And boy, here I'm getting into some real tough territory here, aren't I? You say, great for you, LeGard. Good thing you're getting married. You're going to have to deal with this on a different basis. I would just say this, though, that the very fact that we have allowed ourselves the total freedom to use the pill and to control pregnancy from happening, I think has opened wide, wide doors for controlling the end of a pregnancy. We've thought we've had control over pregnancy, therefore we can end the pregnancy just as well. That's not a totally legitimate argument. I'm not going to stand here and take, you know, this is going to be the first time, I think, in forever I've not taken a position on something. I feel really nervous about this because usually, but on this particular one, I'm not sure how I come down on this one, but I think we've got to rethink it more seriously than we have. And not just assume that just because we've kept the sperm and the egg apart, that that's all that God is wanting from us. I don't know. I think it has caused us a lot of problems we haven't even thought about. Well, enough of that. Now, as a lawyer, can I give any advice at all about how we might get out of it legally? I have this much advice, and because you're not a group of lawyers, I won't spend much time on it. But remember we were talking about there being really no difference between the non-viable and the viable child? If we give protection to the viable child, as a matter of equal protection, if there's no difference between the two, we ought to protect the non-viable as well. Another way of looking at that is this. If we protect the child from everybody in the entire world except the mother and her physician, then we ought to give the child equal protection against the mother and her physician. It's an equal protection argument. I don't think we're going to win the privacy argument. We're too wedded to privacy. How many of you want privacy rights to be taken away? No one I know. We all want our privacy. We all are enamored with privacy. We don't want to get... Privacy allows us to do what we choose to do, you see. That's why they're so closely linked together. I don't think we're going to win on the privacy argument. The chance that we had to win was recently in the case that didn't sort of bring it up and let it happen. The Guam case is going to be very interesting when that comes up. The Guam case. Look forward to that. But suppose we never are able to get across the privacy hurdle. Equal protection, I think, is the way to go. Equal protection is the way to go. But all that having been said, I don't think we're going to get to the point where we can really convince the entire nation through law that it's wrong to commit abortion. Sadly, we convinced an entire nation that it was right because of what the court said. But I don't think we're going to have another Brown versus Board of Education that ended segregation officially that's going to have the kind of effect that Brown versus Board of Education did. I don't think we're going to have that in the area of the abortion. Listen, we're coming down to near the end of the time we have together. I have a few more remarks, but would there be any questions out there that you'd like for me to try to field? Let me take about 5 minutes, and then I want to come back and have some closing remarks. Yeah?
You haven't really hit the idea of God being sovereign over life, and then he gives the exceptions. It seems to me that's the basis we have to come from in the church.
Yeah. The comment that God is sovereign over life, and if he is sovereign, then he has control over any exceptions. And he gives us instructions about those exceptions, by the way. Self-defense, he justifies. Where our life is threatened, we can take the life of someone else, and so forth. But when we don't see something clearly delineated as an exception, we tread on very thin ice to assume his sovereignty. That's a good point. Yes?
Will the outcome of the election really have any effect on what's happening?
Oh, good question. The outcome of the election, I think, is going to have some effect, and that is, or at least potentially so, the one key thing that everyone thought the Republican administration was going to take care of was the Supreme Court and its decision on abortion. It didn't happen, or at least hasn't happened so far. But in time, let's suppose we had a successive number of administrations that appointed more liberal judges, then we might have not only more difficulty getting rid of Roe v. Wade, but it might be even more liberal with regard to abortion. So the potential impact of any presidential candidate is mostly in appointing judges. I don't think it'll have much to do with what happens on a national election basis with what happens state by state, because right now the abortion laws are basically governed state by state. Your local representatives may have an impact on that, but I doubt if there will be much impact from the White House, except for the appointment of judges. And then I think the battle is just going to go on. The one thing that you do not have is any moral force coming down from the top if you've got a candidate who believes in pro-choice. And
Actually becomes a cheerleader.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. Is there another question? I started to get off in another area here.
Are you familiar with Ted Kennedy's bill giving homosexuals more rights?
I'm not familiar with Ted Kennedy's bill giving homosexuals more rights, but it wouldn't surprise me that there would be one, and it wouldn't surprise me if it was coming from Ted Kennedy. I mean, this is the liberal agenda, and I'm telling you, abortion and radical feminism, and they're all in the same basket from the liberal agenda. And that's why I think we do have to make every effort to try to vote correctly, to get people to vote correctly. It makes a big difference. Yeah.
Euthanasia. Being a critical care nurse, I think that 25 years, that's going to happen a lot sooner than it's happening now.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a critical care nurse here saying, I'm being real optimistic on the 25 years until we get to euthanasia, because we've got the advanced directives that many of us have been signing or asked to sign in doctors' offices, and it's how do you want your life to end kind of thing. And if we say, we get to the point where, you know, we're just not comprehending things the way that we'd like to comprehend them, let's just end the life. You talk about your sovereignty of God and when life should end. There's nothing in God's law that I know about that says it's wrong to take someone off of life support system that is artificial, because by nature, by definition, it is artificial life support. We've had the idea that you got to keep them living as long as you possibly can, when in the olden days, they died. They died. And as Christians, death is our portal to heaven. And there's nothing wrong with dying. It's just that we don't want to advance that death. By the way, our initiative in California says that there can be doctor-assisted suicide when requested. And the doctor who was a former California Medical Association president said, you see, what's happening is we're just helping the patient to do something they would like to have done. We're not killing the patient. It's the disease that's killing the patient. Let me tell you, in criminal law, every one of my criminal law students would flunk their exam if they said that, because homicide always has been the hastening of death. We're all going to die sometime. We're all dying right now. You and I are dying. And when some killer comes along and puts a bullet in our body, he's hastening death. That's murder. Now what we're saying is a physician ought to be able to do that. Hasten your death. And somehow or another that won't be homicide? Man. By the way, it will be the first time that I know of, correct me anyone if I'm wrong about this, it'll be the first time that any civilized nation, quote-unquote civilized nation, however you define that, has ever legalized doctor-assisted suicide in modern times. We're not talking ancient Greece or Rome or whatever, we're talking modern times. I think it is, that we would be the first nation. Yeah.
One of the most frustrating arguments that I have dealt with in discussing abortion and current elections with other Christians is you can't legislate morality.
Yeah.
Help me with that.
You can't legislate morality. I can help you with that, I hope. You can't legislate morality. Oh, yes, you can. We do. Every law that I teach my students in criminal law is a moral law. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal is a moral law, and we do enforce it. Now, you cannot legislate a morality that a people will not back up in a nation. We found it out through prohibition. But if the people have the will to do it, we can do it. And we have the right to do it. We have the right to do it, and we assume we have the right to do it when it comes to victims. I'll tell you, you just let a bunch of neo-Nazis decide that they're going to put Jews to death in wholesale slaughter, we will step in as a society and legislate morality. You have a bunch of Ku Klux Klan saying we're going to lynch blacks again, we will step in and impose morality. And well, we should, and well, we do. It's just a question of do we have the will to impose morality where we see the victim. and as soon as the baby in the womb is seen as a victim, as I said, if wombs had windows, the abortion debate, and we would impose our morality. By the way, that is the hope of the end of the controversy. The hope that we have is that we're going to see the baby through medical science so clearly someday, there won't be any question about it. And we'll have to stop this nonsense. It won't be the lawyers who stop this. Was that a surprise? It's going to be the medical doctors themselves who stop this nonsense. Yeah.
As I'm reading this, the penalty for causing a miscarriage is not the same penalty as for murder. It's crime.
Yeah, the passage in Exodus where two men are fighting, a woman standing by is killed, and the question of whether this baby that miscarriages, the first thing we got to deal with is there is a great amount of confusion over exactly what is going on, whether there's a miscarriage, whether the baby is born alive, whether we just, from the language, the scholars are split on that. But let me just say this, with regard to the difference in penalty, it's not considered, it's sort of like a civil thing. It's almost like property. But what we have to understand is that we don't penalize all homicide the same right now. You don't have the same punishment for someone who is a first-degree murderer that you do for someone who's a drunk driver. You have capital punishment for someone who lies in wait, premeditates a killing, cop killings, but you don't necessarily put someone in an electric chair for killing someone who has died as a result, or killing someone who has caused a death as a result of drunk driving. We don't label all homicides nor punish them exactly the same. The fact that we don't give them the same treatment doesn't mean that the victim wasn't a human being worthy of some protection. And throughout the laws of Moses, there were different penalties for different kinds of crimes. So that argument just doesn't win the day either. Any other questions? These are great questions. Yeah.
Well, this question of hastening death, it seems you could carry it to the point that if you don't take reasonable and proper care of your body, you're hastening death.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. And we are. And we do. That's right. And I guess in a way that's what the pro-choice people would say is that we make those kinds of decisions every day adverse, and so but they've got to get that child as part of their body, and that one just won't float. Won't float at all.
I'm thinking more related to euthanasia.
Oh, with regard to euthanasia, exactly. When you get on that end of life, you could refuse to eat, I suppose, but what we've always said that outright suicide is wrong. Now what we're saying is suicide is okay and you can assist someone to do it. But we've always said because of God's providence over our sovereignty, the sovereignty over our lives, that we don't even have a decision in that regard. One of the things we are finding, by the way, is that many times there are people who get into the depths of despair and pain and ask for someone to kill them, and they live through a momentary time of pain and despair, and they come back and they say, "Thank you for not killing me." You know, it's the same people. This is funny. This is sad. No, this is sad. The same people who will make the argument that we can't have capital punishment because we might find out the person is innocent after the fact are the same people who are saying the minute someone says they want to be killed because their quality of life isn't what they want it to be, we need to kill them. Even if later on they might change their mind. Oh, it's just mind-boggling. Well, let me end with these thoughts because I ran over this morning and I don't want to run over a second time. The next speaker is giving me the old cutoff here. Let me just say this, that I think that there are all sorts of hard cases on abortion, and I don't want to minimize that. Do not want to minimize that. But for most cases, we're not talking about the person who cannot economically afford the child. Most of those women who are in the lower economic brackets do not believe in killing their children. It's the upper middle class, mostly that are killing their children in the womb. It becomes sort of a lifestyle thing. And to me, the strongest argument that ever was made, I saw physically take place in Oxford, England, Oxford University, at the Student Union Debating Center, there was a debate about abortion. Ironically, two men, not really ironically when you think about it, two men in favor of abortion, two women against it. They were making impassioned arguments, but they did not have the microphone that I've got. Big hall, students sitting on both sides like the parliament that you see where they yell and scream at each other. The speakers were speaking as loud as they could, but everyone was listening with rapt attention. And in the middle of all that, students everywhere, there was a little baby that whimpered. And everybody looked around like, what is that baby doing here? Just so surprised. What is it? Attention went back to the speaker. The speaker talked for a little bit longer, and then there was that cry. You've all heard it. The one you hear at weddings and graduation ceremonies and funerals, and then those looks that the mother got in the back of her head as she was leaving rapidly through the door, already knowing what look she was getting. You know those looks, don't you? You've given those looks, haven't you? It was that look that says, get rid of that baby. It's interfering with what we're doing. And it just dawned on me, that's really what the abortion thing for many, 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 many women is all about. Get rid of the baby. It's interfering with my lifestyle. We're not talking about threatening my life. We're not talking about rape or incest. We're not talking about the handicap case. We're talking about the typical average abortion. Get rid of the baby. It's interfering with my life. You're going to think this is a preacher story, and like you, I never believe any preacher stories. But I went up to the parents afterwards, and I said, it just occurred to me during this debate that maybe one of the most important statements was made by your daughter. In my book, would you give me your daughter's name and permission to use it? It was a Orthodox Jewish couple, and they said, we'd be happy to have that happen. I said, our daughter's name is Hayamuska. Hayamuska. I said, well, what does that mean in Yiddish or Jewish or Hebrew, Hayamuska? It means life. It means life. And what we were saying was, get rid of life, if necessary, so that we can get on with lifestyle. Ah, that comment blew me away. Let's go to our Father in prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for these quiet times to stop, think together, reflect upon the meaning of life as you revealed it to us through your word. We thank you for the sanctity of life, the beauty of it. We thank you for the precious whimpering in the back of the room at this moment that reminds us of that which you've given us as a blessing. May we take it more and more seriously every day. And may we be more and more concerned about the shallowness, the crassness in which that life is handled. Be with our nation in its effort to resolve this crucial issue. Help us to be sensitive, but help us to be forceful and informed, able to go out and do battle with those who do not know you and do not know your values. Whatever the issue may be, help us to be your people through whom this world will see you in all that we do. For it's through his name that we pray.